I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The photograph spread out on the passenger seat next to me told a story I never thought I'd have to confront. In them, my wife, Belinda, was locked in an embrace with Tom, her boss, right on our doorstep. I had been away on a business trip, and while I was out there working to provide for us, she was here, doing this. My stomach churned, the heat of betrayal coursing through my veins like wildfire. This wasn't some random fling or a one-time mistake. No, this was different. It was planned. It was calculated. It was personal. At first, I didn't know what to do. My entire world had just imploded. The person I trusted most in life had stabbed me in the back and with her boss, of all people. The more I thought about it, the more the anger inside me grew. But I wasn't about to fly off the handle. Smashing something or screaming wouldn't fix this. I needed something bigger, something that would make her, and him, feel the weight of their actions. I wanted revenge. Belinda had always been career-focused, obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder. I could respect ambition. Hell, I had it myself, but this? Sleeping with her boss to get ahead? She crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And Tom was no saint either. He was a well-respected figure at the company, the kind of man who made decisions that affected thousands of people, including me. He was also someone I knew well, which made this all the more disgusting. As I sat there in the dark, watching the clock tick, I realized that ruining their careers would be the perfect retribution. It would hurt them where it counted most. And the best part? I could make it all happen without them ever knowing it was me. That night, a plan started to form in my mind. I knew Belinda's workplace. I knew the people. I knew the hierarchy. But most of all, I knew how fragile corporate reputations could be. Tom had a lot of skeletons in his closet, things I'd picked up over the years through casual conversations and industry gossip. I knew just where to hit him to bring his entire world crashing down. For the next few days, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I kissed Belinda goodbye in the mornings and asked about her day in the evenings, acting like everything was normal. But behind the scenes, I was already putting my plan into motion. I wasn't going to confront them with the truth. There would be no angry showdown, no accusations. No, I had something far more destructive in mind. It started with a few phone calls, anonymous tips to some well-placed contacts in the company. I hinted at Tom's questionable business practices and suggested that his behavior was affecting more than just the bottom line. Within a week, rumors began to spread. The cracks in his shiny corporate image started to show, just as I had planned. Meanwhile, I continued gathering dirt on him. Every small mistake, every missed deadline, every unprofessional decision, I made sure it reached the right people. Tom's once untouchable reputation was quickly deteriorating, and soon enough, the board of directors took notice. As for Belinda, she had no idea. She would come home complaining about how stressful things had become at work, about how Tom seemed more distant and irritable than usual. I listened, nodding sympathetically, all the while knowing I was the one pulling the strings. This was just the beginning. My revenge was slow, deliberate, and devastating. They had no idea what was coming. The changes at Belinda's office started slow, almost imperceptible. It was just as I had hoped. No sudden explosions, no major incidents, just small, creeping shifts in the atmosphere. She didn't notice it at first, but I could tell from the little things she mentioned over dinner. Tom wasn't his usual self. He was more on edge, more careful with his words. He'd been making mistakes, ones he couldn't brush off anymore. "Something's off with Tom," Belinda said one evening, pushing her food around on her plate. "He's been distant, maybe even paranoid. People are talking about him. Some weird stuff is going around the office." I kept my face blank, nodding with just the right amount of concern. Inside, though, I was already savoring the moment. The rumors were working. The seeds of chaos I had planted were taking root. "It's probably nothing," I said, offering her a small smile. "Workplace drama. It'll blow over." But I knew it wouldn't. In fact, things were only going to get worse for Tom. And for her. Tom's position in the company had always been strong, but like anyone who's climbed too high, he was vulnerable to a fall. He had too many enemies, too many people who were just waiting for a chance to see him stumble. All they needed was a push in the right direction, and I was more than happy to provide it. I reached out to some of the corporate contacts I'd carefully cultivated over the years. An anonymous email here, a whisper in the right ear there. I didn't need much, just enough to fuel the growing fire around Tom's incompetence and shady behavior. I fed the narrative that he wasn't fit for the position he held, that his decisions were reckless, and that he was using his power for personal gain. The beauty of it was that most of it was true. Tom had made more than his share of poor choices, cutting corners and bending rules when it suited him. I just had to highlight those moments and let the corporate sharks do the rest. Within weeks, the effects were visible. Tom's department was under increased scrutiny. Projects were delayed, and deals fell through. The blame fell squarely on his shoulders. As I had intended, he started losing his grip on the team. His authority, once absolute, was now questioned at every turn. Meanwhile, Belinda was caught in the middle of it all. She came home more stressed than I had ever seen her. "It's getting bad," she admitted one night. "The board's been holding meetings without Tom. There's talk that he's under investigation." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Investigation? For what?" She shook her head, clearly frustrated. "I don't know. It's just rumored right now, but people are talking about things he's done, mistakes he made on some of the bigger deals. They're saying he's been using his position for personal stuff." My heart raced with satisfaction. It was happening just as I had planned. The walls were closing in on Tom, and Belinda was watching it all unfold from the inside. She had no idea how deep this was going to go. "That's corporate life, I guess," I said casually. "People in power always have targets on their backs." She didn't respond, but I could see the tension on her face. She wasn't just worried about Tom. She was worried about what his downfall would mean for her. Her entire career had been tied to his success. Without his protection, her position was at risk, too. As the days went by, things spiraled further out of control. Tom's temper flared more often. He snapped at his employees, made rash decisions, and tried to cover his tracks, but it was too late. The board was preparing to make a move. And when they did, they wouldn't just remove him, they'd make an example of him. Belinda, still oblivious to my role in all this, grew more distant as her own job security crumbled. She was starting to realize that when Tom went down, she might go with him. It wasn't long before the stress got to her, too. Her work suffered. She became distracted and less effective, and colleagues began to notice. I watched it all unfold, my heart cold and steady. This wasn't just about Tom anymore. Belinda was part of the collateral damage, and that was exactly what I wanted. She had betrayed me in the most personal way possible, and now I was tearing apart the thing she cared about most, her career. By the end of the month, Tom's fate was sealed. He was called into a meeting with the board and never came back to his office. Word spread fast, he had been fired, effective immediately. The company cited unprofessional conduct and mismanagement of corporate resources. But the real story was even better. His reputation in the industry was ruined. No one would touch him after this. Belinda came home that night, her face pale and shaken. "Tom's gone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They fired him." I looked at her, playing my part as the supportive husband. "I'm so sorry," I said, hiding the triumph burning inside me. "I know he was important to you." But inside, I was celebrating. Tom was out. My plan had worked flawlessly. And now, it was Belinda's turn. The pressure on her grew unbearable in the days following Tom's dismissal. Without his protection, the scrutiny fell on her. She had been too closely tied to him, too loyal. When the dust settled, it was clear that she wasn't going to survive the fallout. The company needed to clean the house, and she was next on the list. I had set the trap, and now all I had to do was watch as Belinda's world crumbled, piece by piece. Tom's firing sent shockwaves through the company. It wasn't just a quiet exit, it was a public execution. Everyone was talking about it. Tom had gone from the respected leader of his department to a disgraced has-been in just a few short weeks. The rumors I had set in motion had done their job better than I ever expected. Belinda came home every day looking more stressed, and more uncertain about what her future held. She tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the cracks forming. She was starting to understand that her own position was fragile without Tom's protection. "They didn't even give him a chance to explain," she said one night, pacing the living room. Her voice was shaky, her usual confidence completely gone. "They just fired him. No severance. Nothing." I leaned back in my chair, acting as though I was processing the information. "Corporate politics can be brutal," I said. "Maybe it's better for him to be out of that environment. He'll land on his feet." But we both knew the truth. Tom wouldn't be landing anywhere. His reputation was shattered, and no company in the industry would touch him now. I had made sure of that. Belinda was feeling the pressure, too. Her name had been tied to his too closely for too long. She had been his right hand, his confidant. The higher-ups were starting to question whether she had been complicit in his poor decisions. She wasn't just another employee, she was a part of the old regime they were trying to wipe clean. The stress began to weigh on her, and it showed. She was more distracted at work, slipping up on projects, and making mistakes that weren't like her. People were noticing. The whispers about her began to circulate, just as they had with Tom. But she had no idea that I was behind it all. Every night, she came home to me, confiding in the very person who was orchestrating her downfall. "I feel like I'm next," she said one night, her voice full of dread. "People are treating me differently. The board isn't talking to me the way they used to." I didn't say much, only offered comforting words that were hollow and meaningless. Inside, I was biding my time, knowing that her turn would come soon. She had made her choice when she decided to betray me. Now, I was making mine. The company had to clean up the mess left behind by Tom, and they needed scapegoats. Belinda was the perfect candidate. As she grew more paranoid, she started coming home later, working harder, trying to salvage whatever she could of her career. But it was too late. One day, she came home earlier than usual. I could tell by the look on her face that it was over. "They called me into a meeting this afternoon," she said quietly, not even making eye contact. "They told me I was being let go. Downsizing, is what they called it." I nodded, pretending to be shocked. "I'm so sorry, Belinda," I said softly. "I know how much you've put into that company." She just stood there, frozen, trying to process the loss. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built, was gone. I didn't feel sorry for her. This was exactly what I wanted. In the days after Belinda's firing, the atmosphere at home became unbearable. She was a shell of her former self, no longer the confident, career-driven woman I had known. The job had been everything to her. Without it, she was lost. And I didn't offer much in the way of comfort. I had gotten what I wanted, Tom was out, and now so was she. The irony was almost too perfect. She had ruined our marriage for the sake of her career, and now she had neither. But while I should have felt triumphant, something inside me started to shift. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel wasn't as sweet as I'd imagined. I watched her fall apart, day by day, and instead of feeling vindicated, all I felt was emptiness. Belinda spent her days locked in our bedroom, going through old emails, reworking her resume, and calling contacts who no longer wanted anything to do with her. The corporate world had moved on quickly. Once Tom was out, the company wasted no time clearing house. Belinda had been collateral damage in a much larger cleanup operation, and no one was going to risk their own careers to help her now. Meanwhile, I carried on with my life, pretending to care, but always keeping a distance. The truth was, I didn't know what came next. I had been so focused on revenge, on tearing down the world she had built, that I hadn't thought about what would happen afterward. Now that it was done, I was left with nothing. One night, as we sat in silence at the dinner table, Belinda finally broke down. She looked across at me, tears welling up in her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how this happened. Everything's falling apart." I wanted to tell her that I had made it happen. That I had orchestrated every piece of it, from the rumors about Tom to the whispers that followed her. But as I looked at her, broken and defeated, the words wouldn't come. I felt no satisfaction in her misery. Instead, there was a hollow ache inside me, one I hadn't anticipated. I had won. I had taken everything from her, and yet, somehow, I felt like I had lost something, too. Belinda spent the next few weeks trying to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She applied for jobs, but no one was hiring her. Her reputation had been damaged by her association with Tom, and the industry was ruthless when it came to scandal. She became a ghost in her own home, drifting through each day without purpose. As I watched her struggle, I realized that the revenge I had sought didn't fill the void that had been left by her betrayal. Destroying her career, tearing down the life she had built, it hadn't healed the wound she had inflicted on me. If anything, it made it deeper. I had gotten my revenge. I had ruined Tom, taken Belinda's career from her, and left her with nothing. But in the process, I had lost a part of myself, too. And now, standing in the ruins of our lives, I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. After Belinda lost her job, our house became a place of suffocating silence. The conversations that once filled the air with tension and betrayal were replaced by a heavy, almost unbearable stillness. She rarely left the bedroom, let alone the house. Her once vibrant personality had been drained, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone I wasn't sure I even wanted to know anymore. Each morning, I got up, went to work, and came home to the same scene: Belinda sitting in front of her laptop, staring blankly at the screen, her hair unkempt, her eyes puffy from crying. Her confidence, her ambition, everything that had defined her, was gone. I thought this was what I wanted. I had imagined this exact outcome when I set my plan in motion. Her career destroyed, her reputation in ruins, Tom out of the picture. I had pictured the moment 100 times, thinking I'd finally feel a sense of satisfaction, of closure. But all I felt was emptiness. Some days, I tried to talk to her, but the conversations were shallow and forced. She would respond with short, emotionless answers, not really engaging with anything I said. The woman who had once dominated the room with her presence, who had driven herself to success, was now a shadow of that person. And for the first time, I realized that in my quest to destroy her life, I had also destroyed something in myself. One evening, I found her sitting on the bed, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Belinda," I said, my voice softer than usual, "you need to get out of the house. You can't stay like this." She didn't turn to look at me, her gaze still fixed on the world outside. "I don't know where to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's nothing left for me out there." I didn't have an answer for that. Because in a way, she was right. Her reputation in the industry was tarnished, and her prospects were slim. She had been tied to Tom's downfall so closely that no one wanted to risk bringing her into their company. And I had made sure of that. The silence returned, stretching between us like an invisible wall. And as much as I wanted to believe I had come out victorious, I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of guilt that had started to creep in. As the weeks passed, the distance between Belinda and me grew. We were two people living in the same house, but we were strangers. She had betrayed me, and I had retaliated by tearing her life apart. Now, there was nothing left, nothing but the wreckage of what used to be our marriage. One night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of how things had gone so wrong. I had spent months plotting my revenge, putting every piece in place to destroy her and Tom. And I had succeeded. But now that it was done, I felt no peace. The anger that had driven me had started to fade, replaced by a hollow ache that I couldn't shake. I had taken everything from her, but in the process, I had lost something in myself. That night, as I lay there in the dark, I realized I needed answers. I needed to confront the truth of why she had done it. Why she had betrayed me with Tom. I couldn't move forward until I understood. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for her to come downstairs. When she finally appeared, she looked exhausted, her face pale, her eyes red from another sleepless night. She sat across from me, not saying a word. "Belinda," I began, my voice steady but cold, "we need to talk." She looked up at me, a flicker of something, fear, regret, I wasn't sure, crossing her face. "What is there to talk about?" she asked quietly. I took a deep breath, the question that had been burning inside me for months finally pushing its way out. "Why did you do it? Why Tom?" She didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought she might not answer at all. But then she sighed, running a hand through her hair, her eyes avoiding mine. "I don't know," she said softly. "At first, it wasn't about you. It wasn't about hurting you, Jason. It was the power, I guess. Being close to someone like him made me feel important, like I was part of something bigger." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected excuses, justifications, and maybe even an apology. But this was worse. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal itself. She was sorry because it hadn't worked out the way she'd hoped. She had been seduced by the power, by the ambition that had always driven her, and I had been nothing more than collateral damage. I stared at her, feeling the last remnants of my anger rise up inside me again. "So it was just business for you? You ruined everything we had for, what? A better job? A sense of power?" She looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought I could have it all. The career, the power, you. But I was wrong. Her words echoed in the silence that followed. I could see the regret in her face now, but it was too late. The damage had been done. I stood up from the table, pushing the chair back with a harsh scrape across the floor. You didn't just make a mistake, Belinda, I said, my voice cold and final. You destroyed us. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her regret. The confrontation with Belinda left me feeling raw, but also numb. Her admission, her reasoning, only confirmed what I had feared all along. She had sacrificed our marriage, not out of love for someone else, but out of a hunger for power and status. It wasn't about me. I had been a bystander in my own life, collateral in her pursuit of something more. The days that followed were a blur. Belinda stayed quiet, avoiding me whenever she could. The house, once filled with tension, now felt empty, like two ghosts living side by side, haunted by the decisions we had made. The distance between us had become an ocean, and I knew there was no bridging it. There was nothing left to salvage. At night, I lay awake, trying to make sense of everything. I had done what I set out to do. I had taken my revenge, ruined her career, and made her feel the pain she had caused me. But in the end, I wasn't any better off. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel never came. The revenge had been hollow, and now all that was left was the wreckage of two lives. One night, as I lay there in the dark, I realized something that had been gnawing at the edges of my mind but hadn't fully formed until now. The truth was, I didn't just hate Belinda for what she had done. I hated myself, too. I hated the person I had become in the process of trying to destroy her. I had let the betrayal consume me, twist me into someone unrecognizable. Someone who found more satisfaction in tearing her down than in healing the wounds she had caused. I wasn't the same person I had been before her affair. And I wasn't sure I ever would be again. A few days later, Belinda and I sat in the living room, the silence between us thick and oppressive. I had been avoiding this conversation, but I knew it was inevitable. We can't keep living like this, I said, breaking the quiet. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with exhaustion. I know, she said softly, but what's left to say? I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. There's nothing left, Belinda. We've both destroyed what we had. I thought getting revenge would make me feel better, but it hasn't. It's just made everything worse. She didn't respond right away, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She knew it, too. I don't know what to do, she admitted. I've lost everything. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I reminded myself of the choices she had made. The betrayal that had set all of this in motion. We were both victims of our own actions, and there was no going back now. I think it's time we end this, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Our marriage, it's over. We both know it. Her face crumpled, and for the first time in months, I saw real emotion from her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't try to argue. She knew it, too. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But her apology, though genuine, didn't change anything. It was too late. We had both crossed too many lines and done too much damage. The love we had once shared had been replaced by bitterness and resentment, and there was no coming back from that. The next few weeks were spent sorting through the practicalities of ending our marriage. We divided up the house, the finances, the life we had built together. It was a cold, clinical process, devoid of any real emotion. We had become strangers, partners only in the business of separating our lives. And when it was all done, when the last of our belongings were packed up and our house stood empty, I felt nothing but relief. After the divorce was finalized, I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It was modest and quiet, a far cry from the home I had shared with Belinda. But it was mine, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. There were no more lies, no more betrayals, no more plotting. Just me, alone with my thoughts. I tried to move on with my life. To rebuild the pieces of who I had been before everything had fallen apart. Work became my escape, a way to drown out the memories of what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, the scars of the past were always there, just beneath the surface. One evening, a few months after the divorce, I sat on my balcony, staring out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the buildings, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure. The pain of the betrayal, the anger and bitterness that had consumed me, were starting to fade. I had gone through hell, but I had come out the other side. I still thought about Belinda from time to time. I wondered what she was doing, how she was coping with the mess we had made of our lives. But I didn't reach out. There was no point. We had both moved on, and though our paths had diverged, I hoped that she had found some semblance of peace, just as I was starting to. As the months passed, I began to rebuild. I focused on my career, making new connections, and finding new opportunities. I even started going out again, meeting new people, though I wasn't ready for anything serious just yet. The scars of my past were still too fresh, too raw. But slowly, I started to feel like myself again. The Jason I had been before the affair, before the revenge, before everything had gone wrong. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the memories still stung, but I was learning to live with them. One afternoon, I ran into a colleague at a coffee shop. We chatted for a while, catching up on work, and as we talked, I realized something. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Belinda. I wasn't thinking about Tom, or the betrayal, or the revenge. I was just living. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was a start. A sign that maybe, just maybe, I was finally putting the past behind me. As I walked back to my apartment that day, the sun shining on my face, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done with revenge. Done with bitterness. Done with the past. It was time to start over. And this time, I was going to do it right. Life had settled into a predictable rhythm. Work, gym, occasional dinners with colleagues. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, and that was what I needed. I had finally managed to put the chaos of the past behind me. Or so I thought. One afternoon, I was walking through the financial district after a long meeting. Heading to grab a coffee. The streets were bustling, and I was lost in my thoughts, mentally unwinding from the day. As I reached the corner of the cafe, a familiar figure caught my eye. I froze. It was Belinda. She was sitting outside at one of the small tables, a laptop open in front of her, a coffee cup in hand. She hadn't seen me yet, too absorbed in whatever she was working on. For a moment, I considered turning around and walking the other way, avoiding the awkwardness entirely. But something stopped me. A strange curiosity, perhaps. I hadn't seen her since the divorce and hadn't even heard anything about what she'd been up to. She looked different, older maybe, more worn down, but still Belinda. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Belinda," I said, my voice steady, though I wasn't sure what to expect. She looked up, startled at first, but then recognition flashed in her eyes. For a moment, we just stared at each other, unsure of what to say. Then she smiled. A faint, weary smile, but genuine. "Jason, wow, I wasn't expecting to see you." "Yeah, me neither," I said, gesturing awkwardly at the chair across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She hesitated for a second but then nodded. "Sure." I sat down, the weight of the years we had spent apart settling between us. The last time we had spoken, it had been cold, final. Now, it was strange to be sitting across from her, without the anger or tension that had defined our last months together. "How have you been?" I asked, keeping my tone light. It felt like the polite thing to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the details of her life since we'd parted. She shrugged, looking down at her coffee. "I've been okay. It's been tough. After everything that happened, I had to rebuild from scratch. But I'm managing." She glanced up at me, her eyes searching mine. "And you?" "I'm doing better," I said, surprised at how easily the words came. "It took some time, but I'm in a good place now." We fell into an awkward silence. Both of us unsure how to navigate this sudden, unexpected reunion. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I never got a chance to apologize properly, Jason. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I know there's no excuse for what I did. I'm sorry." Her apology caught me off guard. I had waited for those words for so long during the worst of it, but now, hearing them, they didn't bring the relief I had once craved. Instead, they felt like an acknowledgement of something that no longer mattered. "I appreciate that," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But we've both moved on, haven't we?" She nodded, looking down again. "Yeah, we have." The conversation drifted into small talk after that. Work. How we were both trying to rebuild our lives. She mentioned that she had started consulting for smaller firms, trying to rebuild her reputation in the corporate world, and while it was slow going, she was making progress. I was surprised to feel a flicker of respect for her persistence. She was resilient, I give her that. Eventually, the conversation ran its course, and we both knew it was time to go. I stood up, and she followed suit. "It was good to see you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You too," I replied, and for the first time in a long while, I meant it. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Belinda's apology hadn't changed the past, but it had allowed me to see her, and as, in a different light. We were both just people who had made mistakes, and though we couldn't undo what had been done, maybe we could finally let go of the bitterness that had weighed us down for so long. Months passed after my encounter with Belinda. Life continued, but something had shifted. Seeing her had stirred up old memories, but instead of reigniting old anger, it had helped me realize how far I'd come. I was no longer the man who had been consumed by revenge and betrayal. I was finally ready to let go of the past and move forward. One evening, I found myself at a company event, one of those networking mixers I had grown accustomed to attending. I wasn't particularly interested in small talk, but it was a necessary part of the job. As I made my rounds, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, I spotted someone new, a woman standing by herself near the bar, scanning the room with curiosity but not engaging anyone. There was something about her that caught my attention. She seemed confident, yet a little reserved, as if she were observing the world around her with a quiet intelligence. I found myself walking over to introduce myself before I even realized what I was doing. "Hi, I'm Jason," I said, offering her a warm smile. She turned to me, her eyes bright and inquisitive. "Hi, I'm Megan." We shook hands, and what started as polite small talk soon turned into a deeper conversation. Megan was an attorney, new to the city, and she had that blend of ambition and groundedness that I hadn't realized I was looking for. We talked for over an hour, oblivious to the crowd around us, as if we had known each other for longer than just a few minutes. By the end of the night, I realized something that felt both simple and profound. I wasn't thinking about Belinda anymore. I wasn't comparing Megan to her or measuring my own happiness by the pain of my past. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was simply in the moment, enjoying the conversation, and looking forward to whatever came next. As the event began to wind down, Megan smiled at me, her eyes sparkling with a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. "It was really nice meeting you, Jason," she said, and there was an openness in her voice that felt like an invitation to something new. "Likewise," I replied, feeling a lightness I hadn't expected. "Maybe we could do this again sometime? Outside of work events, I mean." She grinned. "I'd like that." As we exchanged numbers, I couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the revenge, all of it had felt all-consuming at the time, but now it was just a chapter in my past. A chapter I had finally closed. Walking out into the cool evening air, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. The future, uncertain as it was, seemed full of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, I was excited to see where it would take me. Maybe this was the new beginning I had been waiting for. The weeks following my meeting with Megan felt like the start of something new. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I wasn't weighed down by the past. It wasn't just about moving on from Belinda anymore. It was about discovering what kind of person I wanted to be, and what kind of life I wanted to live, without the shadow of betrayal darkening everything. Megan and I started seeing each other more often. Our connection was easy, unforced. She was confident and independent, and I admired that about her. There was no rush, no pressure to define what we were. We were both just enjoying the simplicity of getting to know each other. It felt natural, like finding my way back to a part of myself that had been buried under layers of anger and pain. One Saturday morning, we decided to take a hike just outside the city. It was something I hadn't done in years. The fresh air, the open sky, the sense of freedom, it all felt like a metaphor for the new beginning I was carving out for myself. We walked for hours, talking about everything from our jobs to our childhoods, our goals, and even our fears. Megan had a way of making me feel comfortable, of drawing me out without pushing too hard. For the first time, I opened up about Belinda, about what had happened, and about how I had let revenge consume me for so long. "I don't know who I became during that time," I admitted, stopping at the top of a ridge to catch my breath. The view stretched out below us, endless hills, dotted with trees, the city a distant blur on the horizon. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought getting back at her, at Tom, would make me feel whole again. But it didn't. Megan paused, looking at me with those thoughtful eyes that had become so familiar to me. It sounds like you were trying to take control of something you couldn't understand, she said softly. When someone betrays you like that, it makes you question everything, your self-worth, your decisions, your entire life. Revenge feels like a way to take back that power, but really, it just keeps you tied to the pain. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized it, but that's exactly what I had been doing. Holding onto the pain, using it as fuel, because it was easier than facing the emptiness that came with letting go. Now, standing here with Megan, I realized I didn't need that anymore. The anger had served its purpose, but it didn't define me. Not anymore. Maybe, I said, nodding slowly. It's taken me a long time to see that. I thought I needed to hurt her like she hurt me, but all I did was hurt myself more in the process. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. It's hard to see that when you're in it. But it sounds like you've finally let go. I looked out over the horizon, feeling the cool breeze on my face. Yeah, I said quietly. I think I have. We continued walking in silence after that, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes when you've shared something deep, something real, and now there's nothing left to say. Later that evening, as we sat together on the patio of a small restaurant, sipping wine and watching the sunset, I found myself thinking about Belinda again. But this time, the memories didn't sting. They felt distant, like looking at an old photograph from another life. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. It was just over. And that's when I realized something else. I had forgiven her. Not in the sense that I excused what she had done, but in the sense that I had freed myself from it. Holding onto that bitterness, that desire for revenge had kept me shackled to the past. But now, sitting here with Megan, looking at the life I was building for myself, I knew I didn't need it anymore. The night air was cool, and Megan was laughing at something I'd said. It was easy, this life. Easy in a way that I hadn't expected, but welcomed. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I wasn't driven by the need to right old wrongs. I was just living, and it felt good. As we walked back to my car, her hand brushing against mine, I thought about the future for the first time in a long time. I didn't know where things with Megan were going, and that was okay. I didn't need to know. For the first time, I wasn't chasing something I couldn't control. I wasn't trying to undo the past or seek out revenge. I was just living in the moment, one step at a time. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the man I had become. I wasn't perfect, and I still had a long way to go. But I had grown. I had survived the worst, and now I was ready for whatever came next. Maybe that was what forgiveness really was. Not just letting go of the anger but allowing yourself to move forward. To be better, to live again. I closed my eyes, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't looking back. The path forward was mine, and I was ready to walk it. The sense of peace I'd found with Megan was a welcome change from the turmoil of the past year. I was finally beginning to trust myself again, to believe that I could create a life without the weight of betrayal. Yet, as much as I wanted to leave everything behind, echoes of my old life sometimes crept back into the quiet moments. One such moment came unexpectedly, in the form of an email. I was at work, going through my usual tasks when a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. The subject line read, "Belinda's final request." For a moment, I stared at the email, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't heard from her since our unexpected encounter at the cafe months ago, and I had assumed our chapter was closed. My curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. "Jason, I know this is the last thing you probably want, but I need to say one final thing. I've spent the last few months reflecting on what happened between us, on the choices I made, and the pain I caused. I'm not writing to reopen old wounds, but because I've realized that I still owe you something more than just an apology. I've been seeing a therapist, and it's forced me to confront some hard truths about who I was back then. I was selfish. I was consumed by ambition and ego. I wasn't the partner you deserved, and I let my desire for success destroy something that could have been beautiful. What happened with Tom was more than a mistake. It was a reflection of the worst version of myself, someone I'm trying hard not to be anymore. I want you to know that I am truly sorry for everything. Not just for the affair, but for all the ways I failed you in our marriage. I know this doesn't change anything between us, but I had to tell you that I've come to understand the depth of my mistakes, and I regret every hurtful word, every betrayal. I hope that you found peace, Jason. You deserve it more than anyone. Please know that I will always carry the weight of what I did." And I'm working to be better, even if it's too late for us. Take care of yourself. Belinda. I read the email twice, trying to process the flood of emotions it stirred up. Her words felt sincere, raw even, in a way I hadn't expected. And yet, they didn't bring back the anger or the pain I once would have felt. Instead, there was a strange sense of finality in her message. A closing of a door that had been left ajar for too long. For a while, I sat there, just staring at the screen, wondering what to do with her words. Part of me wanted to respond, to acknowledge her apology, to tell her that I had moved on and that I had forgiven her, in my own way. But another part of me knew that no response was necessary. Belinda's email wasn't for me, not really. It was for her, a final act of closure on her end. After a few minutes, I closed the email and archived it. There was nothing more to say. Later that evening, I told Megan about it. We were sitting on her couch, sharing a bottle of wine, and as I recounted the message, I expected some sort of reaction, maybe concern, maybe curiosity. But Megan just listened, her hand resting on mine, her expression calm and understanding. I think she's trying to find her own peace, Megan said softly. It doesn't mean you need to do anything with it. I know, I replied, nodding slowly. I just wasn't expecting it. It feels like the last piece of a puzzle I've been trying to put together for a long time. Megan squeezed my hand. And now you can finally finish it. I smiled, realizing how right she was. Belinda's email, while unexpected, didn't change anything about where I was in my life. It was just a reminder of how far I'd come, from a man consumed by betrayal to someone who had learned to let go. That night, as Megan and I sat together in comfortable silence, I realized that I had finally closed the door on that part of my life. The past was the past, and it no longer had any power over me. Time passed, and the memories of Belinda, the affair, and everything that followed faded into the background. Megan and I continued to build our relationship, and it was different from anything I had ever experienced before. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations. It was steady, comfortable, and real. One evening, after another long day at work, Megan invited me to her apartment for dinner. She had taken up cooking recently, experimenting with new recipes, and tonight she had promised something special. When I arrived, the scent of garlic and rosemary greeted me at the door. And I found her in the kitchen, apron on, stirring a pot on the stove. "Wow, smells amazing," I said, leaning against the counter. She flashed me a smile. "It's supposed to be. I'm trying this new recipe for lamb chops." As she cooked, we chatted about our days, the conversation easy and flowing as it always was. It amazed me how natural everything felt with Megan. There was no drama, no tension. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company. After dinner, we moved to the living room, sitting on the couch with glasses of wine. The soft glow of the city lights filtered through the window, and for a moment, we both sat in comfortable silence, content just to be together. Then, Megan turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Jason, can I ask you something?" "Of course." She took a deep breath as if gathering her thoughts. "Do you ever think about the future? About us?" Her question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I hadn't realized she had been thinking about it too. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The future, with Megan, was something I wanted, but I hadn't allowed myself to fully embrace that thought yet. The scars from my past relationship had made me cautious, but Megan wasn't Belinda. She was someone I could trust. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice steady. "I do. I think about it a lot, actually." Her eyes softened, and she reached out to take my hand. "I'm glad because I see a future with you too. I don't want to rush things. But I just wanted you to know that I'm in this. Really in this." A wave of emotion washed over me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years: hope. Hope for a future that wasn't haunted by the past, but built on the strength of something real. "I'm in this too," I said, squeezing her hand. "And whatever comes next, I'm ready for it." We sat there for a while longer, the future stretching out before us, full of possibility. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what it might hold. Megan had shown me that love didn't have to be complicated or dramatic. It could be simple, honest, and true. And with her by my side, I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Megan and I had been moving forward, each day strengthening our connection, but life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges when you least expect them. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting in my office finishing up some paperwork when my phone buzzed. A message from Tom. Of all people. I hadn't heard from him since the fallout, and seeing his name flash on my screen felt like a punch to the gut. I hesitated before opening the message, a sense of dread settling in my chest. What could he possibly want now, after everything that had happened? Jason, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet? The message was short, almost desperate. My first instinct was to ignore it. Tom had already caused enough damage in my life, and I had no desire to reopen old wounds. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this might be my opportunity to finally put the past to rest, not just with Belinda, but with Tom too. After a long pause, I responded. Fine, tomorrow at 2, Cafe on Main. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but something told me this meeting would mark a turning point. The next day, as I walked into the cafe, I spotted Tom sitting at a table in the corner, looking worn and much older than I remembered. He stood as I approached, extending a hand awkwardly. I didn't take it. Jason, thanks for agreeing to meet, he said, his voice quieter than I expected. He sat back down, clearly uncomfortable. I remained standing for a moment, then pulled out the chair across from him, keeping my expression neutral. What do you want, Tom? I asked, getting straight to the point. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. I know I don't deserve any sympathy from you. What I did to you. To Belinda, it was wrong. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and trust me, it's haunted me ever since. I said nothing, just watching him, waiting for him to get to the reason why he'd called me here. I've lost everything, Jason, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. My career, my reputation. I'm barely holding on, but that's not why I reached out. I'm not asking for anything from you. I need to apologize. I need to say the words to you, face to face. His eyes were pleading, searching mine for some sign of understanding. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel at that moment. I'd fantasized about confronting Tom so many times over the past year, about yelling at him, making him feel the pain he'd caused me. But now, sitting across from him, seeing him broken and defeated, I didn't feel any of that. I just felt tired. You're right, Tom, I said finally, my voice steady. You don't deserve sympathy. You and Belinda destroyed something I believed in, and for a long time. I let that control my life. But I'm done with that now. I've moved on. Tom looked down at the table, his shoulders slumping. I know, and I'm glad for you. I really am. I didn't expect forgiveness, but I needed to try. I needed to face the person I wronged. I leaned back in my chair, studying him for a moment. There was no satisfaction in seeing him like this, no victory. Revenge had already played its course, and I had learned the hard way that it didn't heal anything. But at this moment, I realized something else. I didn't need to forgive Tom for his sake. I needed to forgive him for mine. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. You don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm giving it to you anyway. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with surprise. Not because I think you've earned it, I continued, but because I'm not going to let what you did have any more power over me. I'm done carrying that weight. Tom's mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came out. He just nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a strange mix of relief and regret. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Take care of yourself, Tom, I said, turning to leave. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The man who had once been my enemy, the symbol of everything that had gone wrong in my life, was no longer someone I needed to fight against. Tom was just another person who had made mistakes, just like Belinda, just like me. The path to healing wasn't through revenge, anger, or even confrontation. It was through letting go. And now, with both Belinda and Tom out of my life for good, I finally felt free. That evening, I met Megan for dinner, not telling her much about the meeting except that it had gone better than I'd expected. She smiled at me, sensing the change in my mood, and we spent the evening laughing and enjoying each other's company. The weight of the past finally lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I knew with absolute certainty that I was ready for whatever the future held. And this time, I would be stepping into it without looking back. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet contentment, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Megan and I continued to build something steady and real. There were no more ghosts of the past lurking in the corners, no unspoken fears. For the first time, my life felt like it was moving forward without being weighed down by anything behind me. One Friday night, we found ourselves on a road trip, a spontaneous escape from the city. Megan had always talked about this little cabin she loved in the mountains, and we decided to spend the weekend there, just the two of us. The drive was long but peaceful, the winding roads leading us further away from the noise of daily life. The cabin was perfect, small, cozy, and nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. It felt like a world of our own, away from everything that had shaped my past. We spent the evening making dinner together, laughing over small mishaps in the kitchen. Then curling up by the fireplace with wine in hand. As the fire crackled, casting warm shadows across the room, Megan turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "I feel like we've been on quite a journey together already," she said softly. I nodded, taking in the moment. "Yeah, it's been a wild ride. But I wouldn't change any of it." Her smile widened, and for a second, we sat in comfortable silence, just listening to the fire and the occasional creak of the cabin settling in the night. Then she set her glass down and leaned in closer. "You know," she began, her voice almost a whisper, "I've been thinking a lot about us lately. About what we have. And I've realized something." I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What's that?" Megan took a deep breath, her hand reaching for mine. "I don't just want to be part of your life, Jason. I want us to build something together, something lasting. I want a future with you." Her words hung in the air, soft but powerful. I felt a wave of emotions rising inside me. This was it. The moment when everything I had gone through, all the pain, the anger, the redemption, had led me to. And now, here was Megan, offering me the future I never thought I could have again. "I want that too," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I've thought about it a lot, and I know that I want to be with you. I'm not looking back anymore. I'm ready for whatever comes next, with you." The relief and joy in her eyes were undeniable, and in that moment, everything felt right. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't happen. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and realizing that it had shaped who I was. But it didn't define who I could become. That weekend in the cabin felt like a turning point, the culmination of all the growth and healing I had worked through. Megan and I spent hours talking about our dreams, our goals, and what we wanted from life. We discussed moving in together, building a home, and maybe even starting a family someday. It was a future that felt bright and full of possibility. And I was no longer afraid to embrace it. On the last night of the trip, we stood outside, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars above us. The sky was vast and clear, each point of light reminding me of how small our problems could seem in the grand scheme of things. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, for Megan, for the lessons I'd learned, and for the second chance life had given me. As we stood there, Megan leaned her head against my shoulder. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "sometimes I think everything happens for a reason. The pain, the heartbreak, it led us here, didn't it?" I nodded, knowing she was right. Yeah, it did. And I wouldn't have it any other way. The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried. I had someone by my side who believed in me, who saw the best in me, and who wanted to build a life with me. And more importantly, I believed in myself again. I had weathered the storm of betrayal, walked through the fire of revenge, and come out the other side stronger, more certain of who I was and what I wanted. The future was ours, and as we stood there under the stars, I knew we were ready to face it together. And this time, I was ready to love without fear, without hesitation, fully and completely. This was just the beginning.